No, voy a buscar. Ah.
Hola, buenos días, gracias por estar acá. Bueno, voy a hacer una breve presentación de Victoria y empezamos. Victoria Reyes-García estudió Historia en la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. Posteriormente hizo un posgrado de estudios amazónicos en la Flaxo, en Ecuador. Hizo un máster en Agroecología y Desarrollo Sostenible en la Universidad Internacional de Andalucía y hizo su doctorado en Antropología en la Universidad de Florida. Victoria es profesora y crea del Instituto de Ciencia y Tecnología Ambientales de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona y su investigación ha sido financiada en 2 ocasiones, 2010 y 2017, por el Consejo Europeo de Investigación, del cual ahora eres jurado, ¿no? Sí. Su trabajo abarca el estudio interdisciplinario de las relaciones dinámicas entre pueblos, biota y medio ambiente. Se centra en los sistemas de conocimiento indígena y local, particularmente en la relación con el medio ambiente natural y en la relevancia de estos sistemas para comprender y abordar la crisis climática y ambiental. Es coordinadora del laboratorio, cofundadora del Laboratorio de Análisis de Sistemas Socioecológicos en un Mundo Global, organización que analiza los impactos del cambio climático sobre los socioecosistemas. Victoria formó parte del equipo que llevó a cabo la evaluación del cambio transformador de la Plataforma Intergubernamental Científico y Normativa sobre la Diversidad Biológica y los Servicios Ecosistémicos, y desde el 2021 forma parte de la Academia Nacional de Ciencias de Estados Unidos y desde el 2023 de la Academia de Agricultura de Francia. Gracias.
Pues bueno, muchas gracias por esa presentación. Antes de que empiece, o abans de que comenci, com ho fem això? En català, castellà, anglès?
Una mica la política que fem és que la llengua és amb el títol que seguim.
Sí. Si lo hago en inglés, ¿cuántos no van a poder seguir? Todo el mundo seguirá. No, yo pregunto, porque tampoco no quiero que nadie se sienta excluido. ¿Sí? Sí. Vale, okay. So then I'll switch to English. It's fine. Everyone's okay. Everyone's better. Okay. No problem. Good. Thanks for the clarification. So thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. It is a little bit surprising for an anthropologist to be in this Instituto de Ciencias del Mar, maybe, but I hope we can find some common ground. So I'm going to be talking today about the carbon footprint of the scientific activities. I'm going to be focusing on this called the Licci project, that it was an ERC project that I directed between 2017 and 2023. The idea of what I'm going to be presenting today is mostly in this idea of sorry, let me just put the watch. On this idea of not only what research we do, but also how do we do our research, right? So in the last framework program of the European Union has been insistent a little bit more on doing research in a very responsible way, right? So it's not only about doing innovative research, but also doing it in a responsible way. The EU framework program wants that researchers take into account the impacts that we have in society and in the environment. I must say that although this is kind of like the frame, when you start looking into the framework or the directives, they are mostly focusing on societal impacts, so including diversity and all these issues. There is not much on the environmental impact, but I think it's something that they want to take into account. And so to ensure that our scientific activities, they are aligned with the values that we want to maintain as a society, values based in equality, gender equality, ethics, public engagement, education, governance, sustainability. So it's this kind of like idea that we need to be thinking on the how of the research, not only on the what research. So this is the context, the big context on which I'm going to be framing the presentation today. So basically, I'm going to be talking about this idea of what are the carbon emissions associated with scientific activities. And there has been a lot, or not a lot, there is a growing awareness that there is an environmental impact of our professional activities, and we cannot just say, oh, I'm doing that for science. Science is good, so I can do whatever it's needed, right? I mean, that's not I mean, we need to be thinking a little bit more on that. And most kind of like concerns have been around the issue of flying. And here I'm just putting a couple of articles about air travel. So how much scientists fly to attend to conference, to do field work, etc. But there is also some growing concern or awareness that it's not only the flying, but it's also other activities that we do in our day-to-day work, internationalization, conferencing, commuting, and then maybe in your case, some of you who were just talking before coming here, is like taking the ships, for those trips. And I was talking with one NASA person in the NASA, and she said, "Oh, flying, like flights." Plane flights, that's nothing, because for them it's like this space flying. It's what. So I mean, there is, and then there is other people concerned about the food that we eat in our institutes, etc. Right? So there are other activities that have to be taken into account. So this is kind of like, so there is a growing consciousness of that, but we are still not there. So what I'm gonna try to do today with this presentation is to kind of like set us thinking on how we can contribute to this debate on what are the pathways to decarbonize the academic sector, right? So what can we do, and how can we put ourselves in these pathways? And we did so calculating the carbon emissions of the research project, the Licci project that I'm going to be introducing just now. And then product of this calculation that we did, we kind of like start thinking, how can we reduce this impact? I mean, why have we emitted so much, And what are the ways in which this can be reduced or changed? So let me just introduce you the Licci project, so you have a little bit of the context of why we started with this idea. The Licci project, as I say, is an ERC research funded. Licci stands for Local Indicators of Climate Change Impacts. And this is also important because if you realize, we were conducting this project on climate change impacts, and halfway through we realized that we were part of this kind of like emitting impacts, and we wanted to study the impacts of climate change, but we were like, oh, but maybe we are actually kind of like also impacting, So we wanted to bring, because I'm an anthropologist, right? So the concept was to bring the voices of indigenous people and local communities. Here, I have that. IPLC stands for Indigenous People and Local Communities, to bring their voices and their ways of seeing climate change to research and policy. And the idea of the project was that if you look at this map, this is a map of the idea is that there is most of the research on climate change and the projections comes from data that is from the natural sciences, from weather stations, right? And if you look at this map, you have like a map of all the weather stations. The coverage of weather stations is very good in some areas, but it's not very good in other areas, right? And so all the projections that you do for these areas are more patchy because you have less coverage of weather stations, right? So the idea of this project, or the intuition, and why they give me the money too, is that there is local people there with a long history of interaction with the environment that have a knowledge systems that can help us to understand what are the effects of the changes in climate variability on the biophysical system with which they inhabit, right? So this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to all these places where you have very scarce meteorological data, but very rich local knowledge, and ask people, okay, so what climate change looks like here? No, what are the changes you are seeing around you? That was kind of like the premise or the intuition of the Licci project. And to do so, what I did was these are the objectives of the project, but we wanted to look at this local knowledge in many places to get a global understanding. So it was very locally grounded, but trying to have like a global understandings of the perceptions of indigenous people on climate change impacts, and bring that to policymaker. And I wanted to do that through creating a network of partners working in different areas of the world. And here you see like all the places where the Licci project have field sites. I'll have another map later, right? But basically, I had, all this is so you understand then how we decarbonize such a crazy project, right? So I had like this core team in Barcelona. These were the people who were funded by ERC. These were like 4 or 5 PhD students, 2 or 3 postdocs, 2 or 3 technicians that were in my lab in Barcelona. And this is the team that developed the methods, the protocol, coordinated the data collection, created the data, etc. And then I had 48 partners globally distributed. That was my ambition, right? To have cases in the 5 main climate zones: arid, deserts, tropical, polar, snow, and to have the major primary livelihood activities, so hunter-gatherers, fishers, agriculturalists, pastoralists, have like a wide distribution around the world, and then collect data. And then I wanted to do also like a citizen science kind of data collection. I'm not going to talk much about that, right? So, but then what I wanted to do, or what we did, was to develop a protocol that was locally meaningful, because we were working with indigenous people, and every one of them have their own problems, their own concerns, their own issues, right? So all the protocols have to be locally adapted, but they have to be cross-culturally comparable, right? So we actually devoted like 1.5 years of the 5 years of the project to test the data. The testing of the data in itself mean going to Kenya, going to Bolivia, going to China, because we had this protocol that we designed in the office or with the experience that we have, and then you get to the places and you have to test it, and it had to work everywhere. And but just as a detail, as an anecdote of like how the complexity of this, we have, for example, a measure of wealth that was, the houses of people tell you the wealth of people. If people have their houses made out of bamboo or thatch palm, there is usually people who have less material wealth than if you have them in bricks or things like that. So we have like this measure of like, the houses, the material of the whole walls of the houses. And then I arrived to Kenya by plane, to the Dashana, and on the plane, as I was landing, I was like, they don't have 4 walls. Their houses are rounded, right? So the protocol was not good. Anyhow, just to say that we had to do this protocol that was meaningful at the local level, but cross-culturally comparable, right? And then, so to do that, we developed this huge protocol, and we had these face-to-face trainings in which we bring people. So we, let me maybe stop here for a minute. I forgot to say that we had this call to be able to work in these 50 places that I wanted to work, I open a call in which I say, guys, I'm looking for partners to collect data on local perceptions of climate change impacts. You can apply. If you apply, you will have to come to Barcelona for a long face-to-face training, for a week training in Barcelona, and then you will go to your places, collect the data I want, and that will be the data for the Licci project, and then there was like an economic compensation, right? So we had this call, like I had like 600 applications or something, and then I finally selected these 50 partners. So these 50 people, so we developed, the core team developed this protocol for like a year, and then the 50 people came to Barcelona in 3 batches, to come and be trained to collect the data on local perceptions of climate change impacts. And the protocol is online, and this is a picture of like the data collection. And then people went to the field, and then they had 1 year to collect data. And then COVID hit. So everyone was stopped. No one could go actually to the field. Everyone had come to Barcelona, everyone was trained, but then we actually couldn't collect, or they were stopped to collect the data, and we had to actually reformulate the whole schedule of the project, right? Because we have to redirect the activities, we have to extend the data collection period, etc. And the contracts, etc. So one of the things that happened there is that many of the partners that we have trained and that have flown to Barcelona, when I mean the partners, these are people who were coming from Mongolia, Brazil, Argentina, the US, Canada. It was from all over the world, right? All over the world. So many of them couldn't collect the data because indigenous peoples closed many of the areas. I had people arriving to a village in the Amazon, and people finding a post there, don't enter, we are close ourselves, for the COVID. So many people, and then we have to wait for a year. So many people have already finished their postdocs, contracts. There are some people couldn't actually collect the data, and we actually had to train other people. We have to do other workshops to train other people to collect the data, because otherwise we couldn't do the project. And we did those online. And if you go online, you can find some of this training. We recorded them, and they are online, right? So at the end, and I'm getting to the carbonization of this. Sorry. Oh. So at the end, this is the data that we actually collected, right? We trained 63 people, 50 face-to-face. They came to Barcelona, 13 online. Of those, 23 completed the data collection that they were supposed to do. 30 did partial data collection. 11 people actually abandoned the project because of the COVID, or because of other reasons they couldn't actually go and collect the data. So in this impasse that we were there, we had like the year of the COVID that everyone was kind of like questioning themselves. We said, guys, this project on climate change, oh my God, all these flyings, because by then we have finished the training, right? By then we have finished the training that had been here, in the first year and a half of the project. This is where the training was happening. Everyone has come. And we wanted to study climate change, and the only thing we have done was to fly people around, right? To fly people to Barcelona, then the COVID happened, and we were like, guys, what are we doing? Because the team, and I think this is something that it's very characteristic probably of many of you, people have a legitimate concern on climate change, and people want to contribute, or we want to do it better, right? And people were like saying, okay, what have we done? And then that's when we start thinking, okay, let's think about that. Let's look at that, and let's see what have we done and whether we could have done it better. And in this context, we started this analysis that I'm going to be presented here with a master student and some of the postdocs of the team. I mean, the whole team was implied, but the work was done mostly by a master student and a postdoc and myself. And then at that point, we say, okay, let's look at the carbon impact we have had so far, right? So we decided to look at 4 different items or different lines. One was the research-related travel. This means flying to do field work. For example, this testing of the protocols, right? Did we need 4 people going to Kenya to test the protocol? And conferences. Do we need 5 people of the team going to the same conference? Training. Do we need all this training that people have come from all over the world, etc.? No? So we actually went back to the manager of the project and asked her to compile all the trips that we have done. So most of them, most of the stretches were done in plane. So we compile all this. And then the other thing we looked was at the internationalization of research. My ambition or my vision was to have like this super international team, right? So I have a postdoc from China, a postdoc from Brazil, then someone from Germany, and another PhD from France, etc. Right? So the team in Barcelona was very international, right? What's the consequence of that? Every time there is a holiday, it's like, I'm flying back home to see my partner lives in Amsterdam and I'm here, so every weekend I fly that was not the case, but you can imagine, no? It was we also collected among the team, like the 10 people in the core team, this idea of what we asked them, we decide to report what is the personal travel that people have done to visit their families or their partners after they joined the project, right? And we also documented 53 trips, right? And many of them were also done by plane. Then we also collected data on commuting. And this also refers to the core partner. So we ask everyone, okay, so how often do you come to ICTA, the building where our research building, and do you come by car, do you come by train, by bicycle, etc. And then the other item where we look at the carbon footprint was internet use. And for that, we look at the number of visits on the webpage of the project. So the project had a webpage, and so how many people visit there, and the average of data sent and received during 8 meetings that we have during the COVID. We kind of recorded this data sharing or data going back and forth to estimate the average data use. So these were like the four lines that we look at. And then we estimated the emissions of that under 3 different scenarios. Well, 2 different scenarios. The first one is not these are the 4 kind of like categories, and this is the 3 scenarios. The first is not a scenario, it's the actual emissions that we had, or the estimated emissions that we had. And then so in the first one, the first one is kind of like this idea that we just use the fastest and cheapest trip. We allow to all researchers to travel to, if you're interested in a conference, just go, fieldwork, just go. And there's this training face-to-face. And then the team, as I say, was very international. And the commuting, we were daily commuting to the office, right? And then there was no restriction on the websites, just put the best images you have there, etc. And no control on the video during the meetings, etc. So that's actually what we did. Then we decide, okay, so let's imagine a scenario where to do the same trips that we have done, so that the activities remain the same, if what would have happened, what would have been our consumption if rather than using the fastest and cheapest trip, we will only allow the use of trains for all trips under 800 kilometers. So these are the conditions of these scenarios, right? The train, use more of the train, no flights with halt, so only direct flights because stopping on that's also has a lot of consumption. Selecting the participation of staff of ourselves in conference, fieldwork, and importantly, very importantly, this is what we actually reduce more our emissions, decentralize the training. So rather than having a training in Barcelona, because we were bringing people from all over the world, have 5 trainings, one in Brazil, one in Sao Paulo, one in New Delhi, one in Barcelona, one in New York, and people will fly locally. And 3 of us will go to those trainings, but less people have to done. So the trainings here will still be face-to-face, but in different continents, right? Then for the international mobility, what happens if you reduce the trip to having only European teams? So not the Chinese, not the Brazilians. The postdocs were not very happy. We did this calculation, but we did it. And then including some teleworking, less commuting, and then doing some changes in the web page and in the way we do our video conferencing, stopping the videos except when you are speaking, etc. So this was like a kind of like reduce emission scenarios, and then we kind of like also design another scenarios with that we call net zero emissions. And in this one, it's like, okay, what will have happened if we only do allow travels? The conditions were only short-term travel, only if it's by train, flights only if you are going to stay there more than 6 months. So no flight for 2 days to New York to give a talk. If you go to New York, then you stay 6 months or whatever. And then no travel for the training, right? Just only the training online. Having only a Spanish team, so you reduce any potential travel, right? To go to Brazil to visit your partner. You can go to Cadiz, but then take the train. Teleworking more, and then reduce the website to only one kind of like web page and only voice call for the virtual meetings, right? So these were like the 3 ideas, right? So the estimated emissions, that's what I call the shame slide, no? We emitted, that's the mea culpa, 161 tons of CO2 equivalents with this crazy travel. And before coming here, we were having a conversation with some of you. I was like, yeah, you emit in several categories, but you have to be looking at which one matters, right? In our case, what matters was the research-related travel. All these travels to test the protocol, to visit the field sites, to train the people had like the highest emission. And then the international mobility, having your partner or your family living in other, like the Chinese scholar. I mean, not to point individual. I mean, that's not like individual shame; it's collective shame, right? So that was that was the actual emission. And then when we look at the scenarios, when we do the calculations, okay, what would have happened if we had applied those measures before, right? That's the numbers we get, right? I mean, we actually reduce the research-related travel from 120 to 80, right? From to 36 or something, right? So it is a huge decrease. When we saw that, we were like, why we didn't do it? Why? Can you tell me? Why? Because no one has asked us to think about that. Because the moment we stopped and thought about that, we saw it so clear, right? If we had done that, this is what we did. Flying from everywhere on the world. I don't know if the map of the world is not very clear, but this is kind of like the continent, and that's Barcelona, right? That's what we did. And if we had done that, this is still face-to-face training, right? This is still face-to-face training. We are not like stopping the network possibilities of people, but here we have like one training in New York, one in Sao Paulo, one in Kenya, I think was this, in New Delhi, and I don't remember, in Bogor or somewhere in Indonesia, right? And if we have done that, and we count that 3 people of the team were still traveling to deliver the training, right? The reduction of this would have been from 120 tons to about 30 on this, only on this category, right? In the category of emissions, right? And the other categories also have. No, sorry, I'm just missing up, right? This is what we emitted. This is the reduced emission. So from 120 to 80, sorry, yeah. And this is the international mobility from 40 to about 8 or whatever, 10. So the reduction was of 40 tons. Sorry, I said it wrong before I messed up but still, no? It was like a one third of the emissions we could have been saved by doing that, right? And this has the category that has more emissions and that has more potential to reduce. This is the estimations under different scenarios, right? And when you actually remove the travel drastically, as we propose for the net zero emission scenarios, then the category that emits more is this issue of mobility. Here is not international mobility, it's the team mobility, but this is just to see like what's the percentage of the categories. You can see that the digital footprint, it's always very, very small. It's very small. I mean, here you almost don't see it, here you almost don't see it, and here it's because relative to the others, it's a little bit higher. So we calculated, and this is kind of like a subtraction, no? The reduction potential under different scenarios, right? So the reduction, and this is what I was trying to say before, but I just got mixed up. The reduction potential of the red is the research related, right? So you have training, conferences, fieldwork, and the reduced emission, and under the net zero emission. So again, the higher potential is for the research-related travel, and then second is for this mobility, the mobility of the team. Oops, I just want to check how I'm doing with time. So, during the preparation, and this is, I mean, I always read that because it's kind of like the shame. We should acknowledge, during the preparation phase, we have not conducted any field work yet. That was only preparing people to do the field work. We emitted 161 tons of CO2 equivalents. This is the average yearly emissions of 24 European citizens. Most of the emissions correspond to travel, air travel, and this is also that some previous research has shown. Importantly, research-related and personal travel are the two categories with the highest reduction potential. So this is interesting to think that under the reduced emission scenarios, we will have a reduction of 42% of emissions, and this will have aligned our projects with the EU pledge of the Paris Agreement to reduce the EU emissions to 40%. Right? If we have done so, only if we have thought before. There's no major sacrifice in this thinking, right? The people still got the training face to face, people still went to the field. It's just thinking a little bit on how you do it. So if we had done that, we would have aligned with the Paris Agreement, with the first part of the Paris Agreement. If we have done the net zero, but here there were more changes or sacrifices and less interactions, then we have aligned the project with the objective to cut emissions to the 80 or 95% to 2050, right? So the two scenarios make us thinking, no, what can be done. So when we did that project, then we start thinking, okay, so why we didn't do it? No, the question I asked you, and what are the bottlenecks that we have to decarbonize research? What are And one of the bottlenecks, and we were also discussing that in the meeting before coming here. Well, one is the one that we were discussing is this one on the impacts on the research career and academics outputs. Many of the young students are like, many of the trainees, they wanted to come because they have the opportunities to interact face-to-face, you meet other people, and if you go to a conference, then you just get kind of like more exposure and more contacts, etc. So people don't want to stop traveling in this case because there is a fear of the things that you miss. But there is not evidence. We don't have evidence on that. We think that's how it is, but no one has actually looked at that, at least and particularly at the senior level. Another thing that we think it's important is this idea of the potential rebound effects, right? Rebound effects, for you who doesn't know the term, means that, okay, if I save all this money because I'm doing the conferences the training I'm doing online, so I save all this money from traveling, what am I doing with this money? Am I doing something that it's even more carbon emitting than what I stopped doing? So yeah, you have to think, okay, what are the effects? There is an issue that we were also discussing, that sometimes doing the right thing is more expensive. The right environmental thing is the wrong economic thing. The economy is okay. But going by train is more expensive than going by flying. And then the universities don't want us to take the option that is, no? So sometimes you have limitations or things that don't allow us to kind of like do the right environmental choices because it's more expensive. And then there is also potential impacts on work-life balance. Okay, I can go to Brussels by train, but if my kid is 3 years old and I have to go to the school to pick up the person, no? I mean, sometimes the fastest thing, the flying, these are issues that individually prevent us from taking those decisions, right? But more than that, we think that the major bottleneck is that all this depends on voluntary action, right? Okay, if you want to go to Cadiz by train, go ahead, do it. But we don't support you, right? So relying only on people doing the right thing is asking people to self-sacrifice because the others are not doing it, and this is very limiting, no? And so basically what we were claiming in this paper, what we were kind of like saying, is that we need guidance, or we need directrices from the government and from the funding agencies to ensure that people comply with some aspects that help us decarbonize research, right? Some ideas here are these carbon budgets, right? For example, I was recently in Brussels with the ERC in the evaluation committees, and at the end they told us, okay, what are suggestions that you have for how we do this? And I said, well, I mean, I did say, why, guys, you, in the same way that you have, what's your take on gender equality, or what's your take, or what's your budget? You should say, what's your take on making your research more sustainable? Because for many people, like for us in the Licci project, if you sit and think, if you're forced to think, then you come up with ideas on how to do it better. But no one is asking us to do it. So we're like, institutions need to ask researchers to have carbon budgets or other forms of like thinking, okay, how I'm including women, how I'm reducing the environmental impact. Because once people start thinking, we are all very creative and we come up with ways to do better, right? And then another thing is to institutionalize some responsible travel policies. And I think I'm going to be finishing with this, showing you how out of this momentum, And out of this thing, we kind of like developed this, we created a group with some people of the Licci project, but other people in ICTA that are interested in the topic. And we developed this responsible travel strategy that you can find online here. But I mean, if you put responsible travel ICTA, you will get the PDF. And it was kind of like, again, this is not a mandatory, or people don't have to actually, it's not obliged, or I mean, no one is checking, but it's helping people to start thinking, how do we travel, right? And it was a set of 4 best practices, right? The first one was on responsible commuting, right? So thinking on how are you commuting? Are you taking the car? Are you sharing? Are you kind of like going by bike? Or what are the options that you have for that? I mean, I'm not going to read them, but you can have there. The second was on travel, responsible travel, and we developed this kind of like decision tree. It's like, okay, do I need to go? Yes, no. I mean, can I go by train, or is more than 1,000 kilometers? Yes, no. Can I go by train? Yes, no. How many hours it takes? And depending on that, it can help you to actually assess whether this trip is necessary, or how this trip is necessary for your career, and balance a little bit the cost of like the environmental cost against the benefit that you are getting from that. The third practice, and this is something that we have tried, and we were talking a little bit also, but we have not managed. It's there on the document, but we are having trouble to implement that, is to have more accountability on carbon emissions, a little bit of like name shame, right? So for example, now for our PhD students, I think Lucia has been exposed to that. You have to do this carbon budget. The first year you have to actually do, when you submit your proposal, you actually say, okay, and to do that, I'm going to need that much money, and I'm going to need that much carbon emissions, right? So trying to kind of like implant this culture of people thinking, that's the mission that it takes to do this, right? So there is some, students are still doing it, but we are not following up very well. So that's also something that requires more thinking. And the last one is promote this responsible travel. So we have for a while these maps in the kitchen of like, okay, which are the distances between one place and another, and what is your carbon emission if you go by plane, but if you go by train. So people actually have there like a visual reminder of like, oh, because sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know, but they're like, you do know. And I think with that, I'm gonna thank, this is the kind of like the happy Licci team that helped meet all this, that helped with the project. and yeah, thank you. I'll leave it here. Should I take the questions, or you two?
Yeah.
See?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Vicky, for that inspiring and useful knowledge that you share. Well, questions?
Thanks for the talk. My question is there an easy way to calculate this carbon emissions? I cannot imagine writing a project and including the kits for RNA extraction. This is the budget. And how can we calculate the carbon budget? Is there an easy way?
But yeah, there are. I mean, the way we did these calculations here, there are these footprints calculators online. So you actually, I mean, it's only estimations, right? I mean, it's not the actual, but they, and even for this paper, there are like a couple of web pages, and they have models and take into account this and that, so you can actually play a little bit with. There is some variation, but online you can say, okay. I mean, you can tell the menu that you eat, and it tells you what's the actual CO2 that you are emitting if you are eating a salad or a steak, and if you are traveling by car, this and that. So these things are online. I think one of the ones we use is footprint calculator, and it's an estimation. It's not like, but they are. It's not so to include that in the project. in a budget, if you do like a carbon budget, I mean, I don't know if there are models there, but the way I imagine is in the same way that you do with money, right? I need to travel to all these places. This is the money I need. And this is, if I do these trips, this is a CO2 I'm going to emit. And then the evaluator can say, or I don't know who, that's a problem, no? We don't have a commission. But the way I imagine these carbon budgets, or I don't know, maybe there can be, in a group in ICTA, they have carbon caps. So for a PhD, you can only emit 2 tons of CO2. I don't know. Then this is your budget. This is the amount of course, all these needs discussion, no? But there are many ideas that you can imagine implementing that.
Very interesting talk. Well, I have too many things because I'm excited on this topic, and I guess I will just pass on for ideas for our friends here. That I think that what he showed, it's clear. It's a clear example of conferences, because conferences are international. They gather a lot of people from all international, and they could be done in the different countries with a different hub, and then a connection between the different hubs, so that people have the face-to-face, because the desire of meeting people is necessary. But obviously it takes time. It will take way more money, and this has to be interiorized, because at the end, when we talk about this, we talk about our shame and the sacrifices, but at the end it's more related to responsibility and alternative lifestyles than shame, because at the end of the day,
right.
It's our status quo, no? And another thing that it's also partially behind this compulsion of doing these things, it's the fact that we are not, in some cases, we are not accepting that science will be slower. And we don't want to accept this, because we want to be competitive, excellent in this center, amount of papers increase. And this is important because, for example, this will change substantially based on the different centers. In here, it will be more plastic than travel, even if we do a lot of travel. So see, this center is absolutely elitistic in this way, because people want to travel a lot, and there is also, you put it the reasons, and one of the reasons is simply desire. You want to travel because it's really fun. Right. And yeah, I don't know, there has to be an European way of thinking this, because it's related to responsibility. Because as you said, 2030, it's now. It's tomorrow,
It's tomorrow. I mean, I think one of the important things, and this goes more for the seniors, it's also our role in evaluating research, right? When I evaluate research, for example, mostly my work is with indigenous people and local communities, right? So for example, when I evaluate for the Canadian agency or they say, okay, how the research takes into account the rights of indigenous people in the Arctic, right? And if the researcher has not done the step of going and asking indigenous communities, how can I do the research? How does this interest you? If you don't have, then there is a place where I tick no. So they just don't fund it, right? So why there is not such a similar thing about carbon, right? So I mean, and then when we evaluate articles or proposals, we have a role in saying, okay, the science might be good, but what is the cost at which, right? And I was telling that I was in one evaluation of one ERC project that there was like $500,000 in trips. And I thought this is very inspiring in what I have done. So on the one side, I was like, oh, I cannot tell that person not to. On the other side, like, I have learned my lesson. I should have done it different. So my role as an evaluator is also to say, guys, this is a cool idea, but you cannot do it at that cost, because that cost, it's for everyone. So what I'm saying here is, for us, is not only what I emit or how my own emissions, but it's also what do I value when I read a CV of a person I'm going to hire here, my new postdoc. Am I looking at how this person addresses this issue? And and of course, as you say, this is still not institutionalized, no? So we need institutions to start incorporating some of these criteria with respect, right? Because you cannot be hiring someone because it's vegetarian or not vegetarian. I mean, that cannot be the only criteria, right? But there has to be some way in which we kind of like include sustainability criteria into evaluation of for CVs, for proposals, etc. Right? That was a long dissertation on your comment.
Is it okay? Hi, thank you so much for your talk. So I like a lot that you raised the question actually if online meetings are indeed worse in networking and efficiency of research than in-person meetings, because many people say, no, we have to meet in person to move science, no? But indeed, we don't know that. And exactly, actually, you had a small experiment to try to answer this question. Then the COVID hit, you had part of the staff trained online. So did you notice if the training in person and training online was different, or it worked evenly well for both groups? Could you say something on that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's difficult to evaluate. I think so. After this project, we have keep the Licci consortium is still alive, and we kind of like continue publishing together on the indigenous people and climate change thing. And I wouldn't say that the people, the partners who were trained online are less active in the consortium than the ones that were trained on live. And I mean, and I don't have a clear way of measuring that, but maybe one, like if you really want to test that, will be kind of like seeing how many of them are in contact between them without me, without me telling, well, let's write this paper, right? And I don't know. I mean, I don't have a clear answer. I can only tell you that at least for being involved in papers, follow-up papers of this with data from this project, there's no actual difference in the training. But of course, you will have to ask them, no? Like, how happy are you with the fact that the training was not? Yeah.
More questions?
Hello, thank you for the talk. So I had one question relating, from all this experience and all the lessons you learned and comparing the 3 different scenarios and thinking, oh, we should have done this instead of this. Was this let's say, a groundwork for applying this new criteria for other projects? Were you able to apply this new thinking for other projects?
So, I mean, in concrete, what we did was not for other projects, but for the same project, because these calculations were done only on the initial phase, right? And then we decide, okay, so from now, for everything else, we are going to follow these reduced emission scenarios. And this is very interesting that you are asking that, because then at some point I tell one student, like, oh, you cannot go to this conference, or you have to decide between the 2 of you who's going to this conference, because we agree that only one person go to one conference, and then that person presents and then there was like this big thing, oh, you are so like authoritarian, whatever. And I say, it's not my decision, it's the team, it's the group decision. I mean, it's like, so we try to apply, but there is some resistance even within that. So that one concrete output was to kind of like start doing it differently in this project. And the second was this responsible travel strategy that we kind of like promote in the institute, which I would say that is not kind of like super follow or anything, but it's a point of conversation. And I think a lot of this is starting the conversation, right? It's starting this conversation. And obviously for the next project, obviously this has made me more conscious in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have more comment than question. First, thank you so much for coming here and explaining all that. Very useful, I think. And then for people interested in that, we have our super group de sostenibilidad, venir. And I think that should be a basis, and it's nice because you have scientific basis to talk to the in our case, to the direction and then to the general SESIC and to reinforce this strategy.
Yeah, no, I mean, just a comment on that. Having this paper, which, I mean, that was a side paper of the Licci project, right? The Licci project was kind of like a result of the COVID, kind of like having us thinking, which is sometimes good. but for example, I sent that to the director of the National Academy of Science, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we should do that." I sent that to the ERC, and they were like, "Oh, we should." So actually, having a paper that speaks in that level, so it's not me telling, "Oh, we should be more conscious." It's kind of like showing data, which is what scientists understand, no? So you have the data, it's like, we could have done it better. I mean, look at that. It's kind of like something that tells people in this position, and it's not that they are kind of like acting right now, but it's a way to start the conversation and to push it.
Yeah. My question is a bit related to the one that you got from this lady. It's about you talk about how to reduce the troubles, but the second part was the internationalization of your team. Are you applying measures on that? How do you see that, the advantages, the disadvantages?
Right. I haven't hired a team after that Licci project. I have not been myself doing that, but this was an interesting discussion in itself with the postdocs, right? Because as I say, in that project, there was like a Brazilian postdoc and a Chinese, and they say, okay, you could do that, but the amount of kind of like, I mean, the opportunities we have, if everyone in Europe that does, the number of opportunities for extra European researchers will be decreased, right? And then, of course, I mean, we had many nothing has happened in concrete, but one of the discussions was like also, how can institutions also onboard that? And in the US, that they have these policies of like, okay, you espouse hiring, right? Which, for example, that could be an example of like things that you could do. Okay, you could hire like someone from China, but like, okay, considering what's your family situation, so are you, to kind of like put that on the table, okay, we can hire you, but let's discuss of how this is going to happen, or more, for example, in our research institute, more kind of like remote working. Can you allow people to, okay, you go to Brazil to see your partner, and can you just combine that with your field work and some research stay there? So not being afraid of having that, and maybe that reduces a couple of international travels over the year, no? And so I have not done it. I wouldn't say that hiring only Europeans or Spanish is the solution to reduce travel emission. I think that has a problem, but I think it shows that that there is a niche, there is a line where we need more thinking to improve it.
Yeah. So thank you again for this enlightening talk. And I think yours is a clear example that we can do better. And just thinking about it, and then, yeah, you can reduce with the reduced scenario and so forth. That's pretty clear. My question is, if you want to apply this institutionally and mainly in evaluations, then my obvious comment is how you do that. How would you do that? If, of course, this depends a lot on the research. Maybe you, by cutting half of your traveling, still are traveling more than other people working on cancer in the lab and something like that. I mean, so because you need to travel for your research, and we do need to travel to do field work because we are studying the oceans and so forth. So, I mean, the tricky thing here is how to normalize that so that when you say, this is your max CO2 or carbon, whatever. I mean, I know. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it requires a little more thinking or fine tuning.
Right. No, but this is why I think the treatment of this should be like the gender kind of like equality discussion, right? You are not saying people, you have to hire 3 female technicians, 1 LGTB. No, you don't say that. You just say, have you thought about that? Is this kind of like equally compensated? Are you taking into account diversity that other people, other ways of thinking can bring to the group? How this can enrich you? And think about that and try to bring it. So here is the same. I mean, I'm not telling people not travel or don't take the flight. I mean, on the scenarios we did, it was a game, no? But it's kind of like, okay, these scenarios, what they do in my head is to put this on the table and say, guys, okay, let's think. And then if you have the postdoc saying, okay, I mean, really, you're not going to say don't hire anyone from extra Europeans. Like, yeah, sure. Okay, but then if we hire an extra European, how can I reduce that? Or how can we... So it's more like this opening of the conversation. And in every case, in every research, you should be looking. We look at these 4 categories because that were the ones that were meaningful in our project. But everyone should be looking at their own kind of like impact, no?
Maybe we have time for... Yeah.
One thing that I wanted more on a comment on this, because it's a cultural thing, no? One thing that happens to us is that when you see the overall percentage of flying, it's 2-3%. But the percentage is so low because 80% of the population never has had flight in their lives. And what this means is that it's highly stratified. And in fact, science, it's almost part of the 10% of the most emitters with flying. But we are not aware or we don't take into account because we normalize, and that because flying, it's the emission that is growing the fastest in comparison with all the other sectors that it's emitting. And what we were saying now, it's very interesting, and perhaps the contracting other people also is linked to not living an expat life, in which people coming here do not integrate, do not have time, then has to go to another country because it needs another postdoc, and they cannot integrate, and it's part of the precarious life of academia. And for this reason, I was saying that perhaps we will have worse science, but in a livable planet.
Right.
Because no research in a dead planet. And integrating this, it's been difficult because we consider, I disagree partially with the fact that it's the same as gender, because there will not be no planet if we don't cut these emissions. And it's slightly different. In gender, we can complain that one center does not do the right thing, but the world does not stop, I would say. So it's a difference that we have to take into account when we think, but with innovative solutions that are useful and equal for most people. I completely agree.
No. I mean, I completely agree with your statement of like, okay, because science pushes us more and more to go faster and to do more. This is kind of like difficult to face. I mean, because the limits of sustainability, it's kind of like a wall against this push to go faster. And this is where I say, so we have to think in our role, not only as a researchers trying to push the hair, but also as a reviewer. Am I evaluating people who are killing more the planet? Or like, I mean, can I have some kind of like criteria in how I evaluate research and researchers? Because, as you say, I mean, okay, they might be discovering super good, nice things. If we are all dead, what's the matter of this discovery, right? So it's that's where I think it's something that the discussion is not very wide yet on the role of us as an evaluators. And for example, in ICTA, we now have like also all these discussions about care, and people say, oh, I work late at night. We don't say anymore, oh yeah, this is such a hard working person. She's auto-exploiting, no? I mean, you have to put limits. So there are like all these things of like, how do we evaluate? How do we take care of the other things? This is slower than what we need. But these are ideas of things that we can start integrating.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you again.